Hi, my name is Elise, and you're listening to Chatterbox Island English Podcast. Welcome back to Chatterbox Island English Podcast. I'm your host, Elise. If you're new to this podcast, hello and welcome. This is an all-English podcast, but we don't talk about grammar rules or vocabulary like other English learning podcasts. Instead, we just talk about some easy and everyday topics. And I usually put all the keywords of each episode down in the description, so feel free to check them out if you want to. And be sure to subscribe if you enjoy the content. So in the last episode, we talked about how to specifically follow up with your New Year's resolutions. And if you haven't listened to that episode, you can check it out after this one. If you want to listen to any previous episodes of this podcast, you can click on any platform that you're listening to right now. For today's episode, we're going to talk about boundaries. More specifically, personal boundaries. Everyone has his or her boundary. It's like a fence that others can't trespass, whether it's physical or emotional boundaries. You can think of it as a rule or a principle that you live by when you decide what you will do or will not do. So let's say someone at work is asking you to do a favor. How much time or effort are you going to allow yourself to do this favor? If you are someone who has a very strict time or emotional boundary, you might just say no without hesitation. But if you are someone who doesn't really have a personal boundary, you might end up doing all the work for others. So it is important for us to have our own boundaries. There are actually 7 types of personal boundaries. The first one is material boundaries, which determine whether you give or lend certain things to others, such as your car, your money, your books, or even your clothes. The second one is physical boundaries, which protect your personal space, privacy, and body. For example, do you shake hands or hug people when you greet them? Who do you hug or shake hands with? Who do you allow to have access to your room, laptop, or cell phone? The third one is intellectual boundaries, which apply to your thoughts, values, and opinions. Are you easily suggestible? Do you know what you believe and can you hold on to your opinions? Can you listen with an open mind to someone else's opinion without becoming irritated? The fourth one is emotional boundaries, which separate your emotions and responsibility from others. It's like an imaginary line or force field that separates you and others. Healthy emotional boundaries prevent you from giving unwanted advice, blaming, or accepting blame for others. They protect you from feeling guilty for someone else's negative feelings or problems and taking others' comments personally. The fifth one is sexual boundaries, which protect your comfort level with sexual touch and activity, such as what, where, when, and with whom. The sixth one is spiritual boundaries, which relate to your beliefs and experiences in connection with religions or a higher power. And the final one is time boundaries, which relate to demands that are made on you involving your time. Sometimes it's hard to set your own boundaries because you might not know what you can or cannot accept. Or you might feel scared that by setting your own boundaries, you will ruin the relationships with others. That's why sometimes it's difficult for some of us to say no to others, either at work or in relationships. But where do our boundaries come from? Because we all have different levels of boundaries, right? Well, we learn our personal boundaries from our childhood experience. If our boundaries were often violated when we were kids, when we grow up, it's more likely for us to not have a proper boundary or even reenact the dynamics onto others. So, for example, if your physical boundaries were often violated by your parents when you were little, like going into your room without knocking or your permission, or asking you to hug a distant relative that you didn't really even know, this will probably make you unaware of the physical boundaries. Therefore, you might violate or disrespect someone else's physical boundaries when you grow up, because to you, it's perfectly normal to not have a physical boundaries or to have your physical boundaries violated all the time. So, how do we set our personal boundaries? Well, according to Mariana Bakharova, a psychological researcher at Toronto University, there are 4 ways to start setting our boundaries. The first one is know your limits. Define what your personal boundaries are with different people, such as with strangers, work colleagues, friends, family, and intimate partners. It might be difficult to figure them out at first, but just know what is comfortable to you. The second one is be assertive. If someone crosses your personal boundaries, be direct to them. It doesn't mean you have to be rude or offensive. You can still stand your ground while being respectful to others. The third one is practice. And yes, it takes practice to let yourself and others know and respect your boundaries. Take little baby steps and start from small things. For example, if a distant uncle or cousin is intruding on your personal dating life that you don't really want to share with them during a family gathering, just politely tell them that you would rather talk about something else. And the fourth one is knowing that it's okay to fail. Sometimes people don't always listen when you voice your boundaries. They might ignore you or they take it too personally and be offended by it. But just know that you are not doing anything wrong. Don't blame yourself if that person can't respect your boundaries and then gets mad. That says more about that person than you, because no one has the right to make you feel uncomfortable. So these are the 4 steps that you can follow to set up your boundaries. I think personal boundaries are something that many of us weren't taught when we were kids, especially in Eastern culture. We are often taught to not offend others and be easygoing and obedient even when we are not comfortable doing so. What about you? Do you feel that you have a strong sense of personal boundaries? Or do you feel like you have a hard time refusing people and often let them cross the boundaries? Feel free to let me know down in the YouTube comment section, Apple Podcasts review section, or even our Facebook fan page. And that's all for today's Chatterbox Island English podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to our show on Anchor, Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, KKBox, and SoundOn. You can also find our shows on YouTube and go on our website, that's www.eisland.com.tw for more information. I'm your host, Elise, and I'll talk to you soon in the next episode. Bye!